I'm a policy fellow here at LSE Cities. And along with my wonderful team, Shu and San and Savas, we run a program called the Urban95 Academy, which is designed for urban leaders all around the world who want to improve the lives of children in their cities. And the program is made possible by our generous and dedicated partners at the Van Leer Foundation, represented here by Andrea and Vicky, who I don't see, but I know she's here. She's here. So thank you for being such great collaborators and for making events like this one possible. Before I hand over to our panel, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're also joined tonight by representatives from 11 cities from all around the world who are here in London this week to take part in the 9th cohort of the Urban95 Academy. So I just want to acknowledge all of your hard work and thank you for being here. And thank you for dedicating your time to improving the lives of children in your cities. So I'll turn over now to our moderator for the evening. Professor Catalina Ortiz is a professor of critical urban pedagogy and also the UCL Urban Lab Director. And she will be guiding our discussion this evening. So Catalina, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you. I'm very pleased and honored to be here. Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So today we are having in the company of the beautiful, smart, active, and enthusiastic women. It's not by coincidence that all the speakers kind of share some gender lines. And I think this is important to point out because the topic we're going to be addressing today has a lot to do with how we need to reimagine cities. And I think in the historic moment that we are in, we are witnessing a historical conjuncture in how we understand urbanity, but also what is even the moral order and the moral compass that we need to use when engaging the most vulnerable population and perhaps the population that actually is the seed of the future if we want the planet to keep existing. Today is no secret that one of the key drivers of the processes of urbanization has been fueled by an intense and devastating processes like wars, genocide, climate devastation, and that now we can no longer assume that cities are these spaces of stability and durability of presence. And I think now authors such as Urban95 has been teaching us notions such as displaceability, which help us to understand that displacement is not just an episode that happens once, but is constitutive of how we live the city today, imposing, of course, new challenges to local authorities, to academics, to social organizations, even to all the international or institutions that handle and have to think urban policies. So today we are going to be addressing this issue and how particularly children play a crucial role in a moment and in a world that in a way is broken, and therefore we no longer can afford to do business as usual. When we are addressing trauma, when we are addressing racialized violence, we really need to think differently about how we engage with people, and particularly children, and kind of connect with their sensibilities, and also the hope and the imagination that they also bring. So I think disrupting how we think and address the city is part of what is inspiring also about working with children, that perhaps you will inform me on that. So today we are joined by Gabriela Brent. She's the CEO of AMA Refugee Healing Network, formerly director of program AMA. Gabriela is a psychotherapist, organizational leader, and mental health practitioner, experiencing grief work and trauma care. She has developed a scaled community-led mental health approaches across family justice, criminal justice, mental health, and social advocacy, working closely with communities to develop healing-centered programs that break cycles of oppression and foster community resilience. We are also joined by Lucy Earle, Director of Human Settlements in the International Institute for Environment and Development. Lucy's work focuses on intersections of urbanization, urban poverty, and humanitarian crises, in particular forced displacement within urban areas. She's especially interested in understanding how refugees and internally displaced people navigate urban systems to meet their basic needs, and how displaced people can engage with local authorities to raise awareness and their needs, priorities, and aspirations. She also works to change the narrative about where displaced people belong, highlighting through research and policy engagement the potential benefits of hosting refugees and internally displaced people in towns and cities. Lucy has a background working on low-income housing, urban citizenship, and the right to the city in the Global South. We're also joined today by Samira Lakfa. She's a team manager in Hackney Council Migrant Children and Families team. Samira is a UK qualified social worker with a specialism in working with children and families and child-separated refugees. She has almost 20 years of experience with working with displaced communities, both in the UK and internationally. She has worked for a range of UK local authorities, as well as a number of NGOs to create programs around education, community engagement, and health promotion, demonstrating a strong commitment to human rights and supporting the most vulnerable and oppressed communities to be heard through a child-centered, trauma-informed, and feminist. But we are going to start to kick us off and kind of set some provocations as well. Lucy will start with a presentation, and then we are going to be able to have a discussion and a dialogue and a response to this.
Thank you so much, Catalina, for those words of welcome. I don't want to stand too close to the microphone. It makes me feel a bit shy. Are you able to hear me okay? I'm also quite loud, so I'm assuming people at the back can hear me okay. It's great to be here, and it's lovely talking to a full room. Now, it doesn't always happen, so that's fantastic. And I understand there are people online as well, so that's great that we're joined by such a big group of people. I'm going to talk about my research at IIED, which is a research institute in London, on refugee well-being. And I should say right from the start that we haven't been working directly with children, but we do think a lot about refugees who are parents and the experience of bringing up children in cities and actually in camps as well. So I'm not specifically talking about child well-being, but I know that my colleagues here in the room are quite well lined up to talk about that. So basically, when I first started working on this question of refugee well-being, I had a meeting with some former colleagues in the UK government. I used to work in what no longer exists, the Department for International Development. And I talked to them in 2019 about how I wanted to start looking into this question of the well-being of refugees. And one of the people in the room, he literally threw his hand up in the air and said, "We've got to think about this as well as everything else." And what he meant was, you know, we have to feed and clothe and shelter these people, and it's a lot of work. And I guess what basically this particular person, and he wasn't, other people in the room did not react the same way, but he was used to working somewhere like this. So this is a refugee camp in Kenya. I know that there are some people from Mombasa on the course at LSE Cities this week. This is a long way from Mombasa, but still the same country. So this is Dadaab refugee camp. If you're in a camp, as you can see, there's not very much around it. The camp is big, but then it's in quite a isolated area. We've also done a lot of work in Jordan. I know there are people from Amman here too. If I showed you a shot of Thatchery camp, it wouldn't look so green around the edge, but Dadaab doesn't always look like this. But the sort of satellite image wouldn't look so different. They're sort of standard places, they're quite remote. The problem is that although the humanitarian actors I was talking to in DFID, they're used to working in places like this. And this is where humanitarianism really grew up in remote areas, responding to things like the famine in Ethiopia in the 1980s, the Rwandan genocide, responding to sort of floods in rural areas, and working in these remote regions. The problem is that the majority of refugees don't live somewhere like this at all. They live somewhere more like this, which is Eastleigh, which is again in Kenya. It's a neighborhood of Nairobi, and it's quite well known for being home to many Somalis, both Kenyan Somalis and Somali refugees, and other refugee populations as well. So if you're a refugee living somewhere like this, the UN doesn't come along and give you shelter or food. You have to find a way of earning a living, and you have to pay your rent, and you have to find a way of feeding and clothing your family yourself. And it's actually a very different environment. And I just wanted to sort of go down a bit sort of close to the ground and talk you through the stories of two women who we met during the course of a research project that in Kenya. Also, it was also in Jordan, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia. But I'm just going to talk about the Kenya. We don't have photos from these other countries, so I was going to talk through this. So this the woman you see on the screen, we'll call her Habibo. She lives in Dadaab, and you can see she's living in what is kind of a temporary-ish building structure in a courtyard. And she has 10 children who live with her and her husband, and they go to school in the camp. And she supplements her diet and the diet of her children. And I think she probably sells some products from goats, so from the milk from goats. But basically, she has pretty much what she needs up to a point within the camp. But it's not really where she wants to be. And talking about what she really wants, she wants a better life outside the camp, and she wants to be able to earn a living so she can support her family back in Somalia. So that's her dream. But then the reality of living in the city is actually quite difficult. So this is Hamdi. She is a mother of 5 children. She's a single mother. And she works on the streets of Nairobi selling tea and food, sometimes in markets, sometimes in the streets of Eastleigh, where she's located there. Her life is tough. So we have a quote from her here. I'm not going to read it out, but basically she gets up in the middle of the night to prepare the tea and the food that she's going to sell on the streets. She also has to get her children up, get them off to school. When she's done that, she goes out to work. She comes back, pick her children, and then she goes out to work again once they've gone to Islamic school. And often she says often she has to leave her children with her house help, and she might not get back in time. And then the kids are taken to the neighbour. But if she can't rely on those women around her to look after her children, she has to take them with her on the streets where she's working. And she actually got quite emotional while she was talking to my colleagues in this interview about how different a life she wants her daughter to have. And also she says she wants a different story for all of her children. And being on the streets of selling tea and so on the streets of Nairobi, it's not an easy gig. Like, she will be exposed to a lot of risks, including gender-based violence, but also harassment and abuse from the local inspectorate. So the Kanjos, who are the kind of local police who will insist on bribes or will take money or take goods away from people selling in doing this kind of informal work. So the problem is that in contexts like Nairobi, go back to that nice picture of Eastleigh. Oh no, I have to go miles to get back to it, sorry. The problem is that in the mentality of the UN Refugee Agency and other humanitarian agencies, if you're living in the city and getting along, you must be what they call self-reliant, because you're not, in most cases across the world, if you're a refugee living in a city, you're not receiving humanitarian assistance. In some cases, nothing, in some cases, a bit. But the question is, like, is Hamdi, the woman who's working in Eastleigh, is she really self-reliant? I mean, that life, is that really sustainable? That's tough, and she is not happy with it. It's not the dream that the other woman Habibo talked about. She struggles to be able to even get enough money to be able to feed her children. So the problem is that most humanitarians, going back to the people I was talking about at the beginning, they are focused on the camp, and that is where the majority of humanitarian funding has been going. In some contexts, sorry, I have to flip through again. In some contexts, particularly in the Middle East, where there's been such big movement of refugees into towns and cities, there is humanitarian assistance. So I'm thinking about places in Lebanon and in Jordan. Humanitarian assistance is given to urban refugees, but the mentality of how that's given and who it's given to and what's given is very much still informed by the world of the camp. So this is where we kind of come into this question about, are we thinking about people's vulnerability, or are we thinking about their well-being? So this first quote, these are 2 interviews, 2 different Syrian women in Amman. This was from a couple of years ago. And one of them was talking about her experience having basically a vulnerability assessment on her. And she says, this woman comes and says, and she gets asked, how many potatoes did you eat? And she's like, what kind of question is that? What am I supposed to eat? You left out electricity, bills, health, education, and you asked me how many potatoes I eat? And we had similar responses from a woman, a man, I think, who was asked, like, have you eaten chicken in the last few days? And it's like, yeah, I've eaten chicken. Chicken's cheaper than fresh vegetables. Doesn't mean I'm like living the life. Another woman said, oh, well, they wrote down that I've got a sofa. It's like, I might have a sofa this week, but next week when I can't pay my child's medical bills, we'll be sitting on the floor because I'm going to flunk the sofa. So it's kind of like, they really felt the questions were the wrong kind of questions that were being asked. These people are not in an emergency phase. They haven't just trekked across a border with nothing but, with the clothes they're wearing. They've been in Oman for at least 10 years. And people in Kenya, some of those refugee populations have been displaced for more like 30. So their needs are very different. And the second quote, I like this because I guess it made us feel better about the research we were doing, that actually it had a kind of therapeutic impact in some cases. That people said they could really express themselves because, that they were pleased that we were asking about more, like they were saying, you're asking for more details. You want to know if we're feeling stressed. Nobody's ever cared to know that before. This is the very first time. That was kind of interesting, and it suggested that people are being asked the wrong questions about their lives. So what we've been trying to do with our academic research is actually try and sort of change the way people are thinking about refugee-dom and being a refugee in an urban area. We're trying to get them to focus on the city and try and move out of their humanitarian mindset to think more about like life as a normal person, like to be live as normal a life as possible. So this is where we're kind of trying to use academic research as this kind of disruptor. So this is research that we're able to do often with academic funding, but it's very much focused on changing the way that policymakers, that's government or UN, think, challenging the program mentality, and trying to go beyond vulnerability analysis to consider well-being. I know I'm going to be running out of time soon, so I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly. But this question, what is well-being for urban refugees? Well, we discovered that no one had asked this before in any considerable depth. And so we began a research project, and this began, unfortunately, in March 2020, which was precisely when world locked down for COVID. And so all our plans to do concept testing focus groups with refugees about what is refugee well-being is slightly went out the window. And we had to do a lot of work based on the existing literature. Unfortunately, most of that literature is written on well-being is based in countries in OECD countries, so rich countries, middle-income countries, and wealthy countries. And where it does look at refugees is generally in countries of resettlement, so the US, Australia, Canada, Nordic countries, Germany, a little bit in the UK. But this idea of what well-being might mean for a refugee in a place like Nairobi or Oman hadn't been looked at in detail. So we had this idea of well-being, this holistic idea. So it is, have you got enough to eat? Have you got a roof over your head? But it's also, do you feel safe and secure in your home? We sort of encompass this under bodily well-being. We thought about economic well-being. So not only do you have a livelihood, a source of income, but are you treated, is your livelihood stable? Is your income stable? Can you predict it? Can you save? Can you borrow money and so on? We thought about political well-being. So whether or not people felt they had someone to turn to raise concerns, whether they felt they would receive justice if there was wrong against them. Social well-being, the ability to connect with others around you, whether refugees or not, to have leisure time. And then the psychosocial side of things. So mental health, but also aspirations, hope for the future, or conversely, sort of feelings of stress and that not being able to use your time usefully. And we recently, this year, have gone through a bit of a stress, as sort of, I guess, for researchers, and then we kind of tested our assumptions when we are now able to, with new funding, able to go back and talk to refugees and ask them these questions: what are your well-being priorities and your challenges? I'm a bit worried that they would come back and say something completely different. Actually, luckily, this is in Oman and Nairobi with 4 different refugee nationalities in each place. Those underlying 5 themes were the drivers behind most of the challenges and priorities that refugees raised, but they didn't talk about them properly, obviously, right, in that tidy 5-point framework. So now we have these clusters of issues that refugees themselves have identified. And what came through very strongly in this latest round of discussion is the importance of fairness, of feeling like you're being treated the same as other people, that you are, and that you are treated like a local, and that you're treated with respect, so that when you go to a healthcare professional, when you go to your child's school, that you are treated like a normal person, not that you're treated differently because you're a refugee or you're poor, or both of those things. So this is where we've got to, and our next steps, so final slides. on this research journey. We're refining this understanding. We're about to go and pilot a survey tool in Nairobi, then in Amman, and moving into Istanbul and Kampala. And then the idea is we're going to come up with a simple way of gathering this data with refugees that can be done on a phone by enumerators who can be trained relatively easily. And what we're hoping is that city authorities who have refugee populations and want to know more about their day-to-day lives, their well-being across those different areas, will be able to use this to gather that data in a way that's kind of safe and easy to understand and produces results that will help with policy and programming. So that's our idea. And so we're not there yet. We're still going to work. We've still got to find the funding actually to work on the tool. But if you're interested in any of these, speaking particularly to the city representatives here, and you'd like to think about this question of well-being and possibly pilot the tool, then please get in touch. Thank you.
So our panelists here, thank you, Lucy, for the very beautiful presentation. You give us a bit of context in terms of understanding the everyday life of people in the city, but also, you know, the hassles of actually navigating places that sometimes are very hostile. And it's particularly in this moment and in this country, this political was migrant, you know, add another layer in terms of the political work that it entails and the political work that it entails. But I think you did like the last couple of points perhaps is also pointing towards how do you connect with the local government? How do you create and generate the services that are needed? How even you reach out, right? What is the relationship with the state when in many of the cases you are coming from places where you have an adversarial relationship with the state, or the state is a cause because you have left. So I would like to perhaps turn to Samira to tell us a bit what in your experience, what have been this, how you have handled this question in the context of London.
So thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it is interesting to be somebody who works for a local authority. When you spoke, it was really interesting because I've also worked in the humanitarian field, and I was thinking about the differences and the similarities that we see. And I think when you work for a local authority, it's interesting because there are systems in place. We have policies, we have legislation, and we constantly talk about working in a hostile environment. I think that's not unique to the UK. But so my role, I manage a team. We work with, so we're a statutory team. So we have a statutory duty. We have legislation that underpins how we work with children, all children, no matter what their immigration status is. But when I think about the families and the children that have moved to London and their experiences of the state, they haven't been positive. So having kind of balanced my work in the humanitarian sector and also the statutory, I'm very mindful of it, and my team are very mindful of it. And as a local authority, we're trying to be more mindful of it because we hold a lot of power. You know, we're looking at housing for people, we're looking at providing support services. My team work with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, separated refugees, and trafficked children. So there's a different dynamic in terms of the support we offer there. We also work with families with no recourse to public funds, which is kind of a controversial area of work. I think a lot of people feel quite there's a lot of negativity around those families who might be undocumented and living underground for a long period of time. I think what we try to do in Hackney is we are, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, we're trying to become a borough sanctuary. So we're making a real intention to be a part of a movement in the UK to welcome, to explicitly look at what our policies are, how we make people feel welcome, how we help them access services, how we help them with their well-being, with their holistic needs. And I think I work really closely with a team called Welcome Hackney. So I've been with the local authority 7 years. And for most of those years, I have been the main spokesperson for migrant communities. And I work within the Department of Children's Services. So I have a limited remit. There's only so much I can do. I do a lot of promotional work. I reach out to voluntary organisations in the borough. I do a lot of training. But I'm limited because I work within a set department. But I have the freedom to do these things because there is a will. We have a shared value as a local authority to be inclusive and to reach out. But we have limited budgets, as we all know very well, working for local authorities. So when in 2023, we established what's called our, we called it Welcome Hackney. So it's a team that works with asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants. And it's very rare to see this in local authorities these days. So it's a centralised team that's really there to bring together all the different departments that work in the local authority to better serve our migrant. We're actually trying to use the term sanctuary seekers more as we're part of this journey of becoming a borough of sanctuary. So it's looking at the needs of all of the community in Hackney, and not just what I was doing previously, which is specifically around separated refugees and families with no recourse public funds. So it's an exciting time to be in this local authority. I think more needs to be done maybe in other local authorities, but it's maybe not on the agenda due to, again, the finances, the politics behind it, current climate in the UK, constant changes in immigration legislation, which makes it very difficult sometimes to do the work that we want to do. But I feel that there is a big push. There's a big push in my local authority to do better for those populations, to help them ultimately feel welcome and know where to go when they need support. I could talk loads more about this, but I'm mindful we need to share the joy.
Yeah, there has been to Gabriela, and it would be interesting also to understand, from the perspective of the network, and even explain a little bit what is this idea of a healing net, and how as I'm a built environment professional, and how we are also pushed to understand and to use and connect with the tools, the expertise, and the methodologies to actually bring healing into our vocabulary. In my own work, working with victims of conflict in Colombia, I came to work very closely with psychologists and understanding that territorial healing is something that we really need to understand, and how to use cities as part of a healing strategy. So I'm very curious to hear your reactions in terms of the presentation, but also what is the work you do, and in a way how you connect also with academia and the state.
Thank you, Catalina. You all, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. So Amna means safety in Arabic. There's many, I know many of you are Arabic speakers, and there's many words that mean safety and many definitions, but really the reason that Amna was set up to exist, and it was founded by an amazing woman who herself, Zala Shalamza, who herself was a refugee with her family, was to create what we call islands of safety. So spaces that people can come to where they can experience for a moment, for a few hours, every week, or over months, an experience of a safe place, which may often and mainly exists in otherwise unsafe environments. So in refugee camps, in war zones, in urban spaces where actually there is a lot of unsafety around. And whilst Amna and all of our incredible partners do a huge amount of activism work as well about trying to create more safety systemically, what we can do is create opportunities where somebody can have that experience in a safe place, with a safe person, in a hopefully safe community, and where there's safe practices, all of which have been really intentionally thought about. And so that's really at the heart of our work. And all of our work is really thinking about, we're working with communities who have experienced profound losses, profound grief, profound overwhelm, stress, and many of whom have experienced, multiple layers of intersecting trauma and also intergenerational trauma as well. So, often in the mental health field, people talk about post-traumatic stress, but really if you have experienced being forced, to choose or have to leave your homeland and not knowing if you're ever going to see your loved ones again and when you're going to return, that is, often complex and continuous potential trauma. But I also want to say that Amna doesn't assume that because people have had experiences that you are traumatized. So all of our work is about how do you create trauma sensitive and also identity informed spaces and services where people can feel safe, connect, feel a sense of belonging, reawaken joy, because a huge casualty of an overwhelm of grief and loss and these experiences is you lose the capacity to feel pleasure, to feel hope, and all of that impacts your sense of future. And we work with the whole village, so with the support of the Van Leer Foundation and other amazing funders, you know, we work with young children and their caregivers, we work with young people, and we work with adults, because we know that it takes a village to raise a child, but for everybody in the ecosystem to support each other. So we start with the kind of, what can we do with our own bodies and our own spirits, and how can we rebuild that that inner safety and that inner trust when the lots around us is out of control. And then with that, often, you know, dignity, increased sense of agency, all of these things can rebuild, because when you have experiences of displacement and overwhelms, many parts of you can become very fragmented. You know, there's part, if you've left, you've got parts of you with your loved ones in your homeland, you've got parts of you with your friends, you've got parts of you in, you know, the new environments that you're in. So it's about also helping that integration to come back together. And then to your question, Catalina, a lot of our work is also about how can you create healing-centered systems. So we start at a community level, and really, and this is hopefully relevant to many of your work, you know, community centers, faith spaces, education, informal, you know, non-formal, formal spaces. All of these are spaces where people go, they connect, they see friends, they see facilitators, and every moment and every opportunity is where you can have that dose of like connection, healing opportunity, and different practices. But then every day people are going, you know, like you're describing, to services, you know, education services, legal services, justice services, health services, where their interaction can help or often unintentionally be harmful, because they're experiencing a service or an interaction that can actually make someone feel so dehumanized, so small, so hopeless, or often trigger, you know, kind of traumatic memories. And so there's a lot that we can do, from, you know, training and supporting frontline teams. We're working with the Welcome Hackney team to support their frontline practice and their well-being, to really thinking about what is the experience of someone when they walk in a building. What's the experience of somebody when they experience an interview, or the way that you speak to them in the morning? You know, what are the policies and practices in an institution that not only impact the, in this context, displaced community, child or caregiver or whoever coming for the service, but also that professional workforce has an experience of developing their professional skills, feeling so much better about their interaction, and having a real reciprocal exchange that can be very healing for everybody involved. So I'll pause there for now, but there's lots of different works that you can do, and obviously you need to work in a bespoke way. So Amna has like standardized, you know, we have trainings and methodologies and approaches that we share and culturally adapt, and we work with different communities, but you then need to work in a bespoke way with that particular council or that particular service. And the really important thing is the co-creation part. Like if you are that health institution or you are that local council, you've got your own set of ideas and things you want to achieve that needs to align with what the community wants and the people coming for that service. And when you bring that all together, you can achieve a set of outcomes that are meaningful to everybody, and then it can be really healing and transformative.
And that perhaps connects very well with what you were presenting earlier, in terms of understanding what are the standards of well-being, right? And even discovering the right to have well-being, and even to have the right to have joy again. So I wonder, you know, for the three of you, what is the role of the public infrastructures, or how can we even reimagine the idea of public infrastructure through the lenses of care and healing? Because I think that is one of the most pressing questions, perhaps, for understanding how you govern a city that is in need and needs to offer a welcoming environment. So I wonder, you know, part in the work, how this has been addressed, and I think it would be good to hear from the perspective of
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to hear about what's happening in my own city. But this sort of, for city officials to take on this role of sort of care for refugees, it's not happening everywhere, and it's not obvious to people in all countries. And one thing I've experienced in the work that I've been doing is that sometimes I was talking to somebody in a municipal authority, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, we know refugees live here, but that's not our business." And then there's a sort of like, that's someone else's business, and they sort of gesture upwards to say, well, that's above my pay grade. Because very often refugee matters are dealt with at the national level, not at the city level, because refugees are seen as a security issue. So you have sort of parts of government dealing with refugees, a bit like in this country as well, where it's about borders, it's about securing the borders, and it's about sort of keeping people out. Or if they come in, it's about putting them in places with fences around them, right? And so there's a feeling that for some people in city authorities that it's not their job, and that they would be stepping on other people's toes if they would start talking about caring and supporting refugees. I mean, luckily that's not the case everywhere, and there's some sort of shining lights and beacons of hope around the world. And I think this is it's a sort of long-term project. And I think we just need to, I think as you know, in my work, we just need to keep on talking about the role and responsibilities of cities, and to sort of, you know, showcase places where this is really happening. And one really interesting example is from Nairobi. This year, Nairobi County launched a refugee integration strategy. And they did that of their own initiative. And actually in the face of some raised eyebrows from the UN Refugee Agency that thought that Nairobi talking about the refugees in the city would detract attention from the place, the camps, which are very expensive to maintain and need a lot of resources. And there's a lot of focus in Kenya at the moment around something called the Sharika Plan, which is about, to an extent, opening those camps up so that there's service provision locally for Kenyans as well as refugees. But Nairobi were like, they were sort of stood their ground, and they said, well, these refugees, there are refugees in Nairobi, there are about 100,000 of them, we think, don't really know, and they're here and they're using services. But that's not being sort of, it's not organised, it's not formalised. And a refugee, it's kind of potluck, whether or not they turn up at if they're depending on the goodwill of the frontline service provider who they meet at the hospital, for example, or if they're dealing with other kind of people in public service. And that's not okay. Like, we need to be businesslike. We need to streamline what our approach is to refugees and what their rights are and their entitlements. So it's amazing they come up with this strategy. And it covers a range of issues, including health and education, business, and so on. And they're determined to start making it work. But one of the ways they have to do that, and there's some champions within the youth department, actually within that's what the champions are, much like you, and actually being a champion from the children's services side of things. They realise they have to sensitise their own colleagues, and they have to build awareness right from the start about what a refugee is, who they are, why they're here, what legislation is in place, and what documentation refugees have, and make sure that frontline workers understand what that is and the rights and entitlements. And it's a slow process because, you know, I mean, these bureaucracies are big places and a lot of people. But it has to start there with like understanding and a shared understanding within the bureaucracy, so that then the services can be extended, and that it's not potluck when you go to the health service whether or not you get treated.
So when you were speaking, I was thinking a lot about and I mentioned it earlier, our striving to become a borough of sanctuary, because that's where I think it helps focus our endeavours to be more welcoming as a local authority, as a borough in London. And one of the things I found really surprising when I was looking this up is there's actually very few boroughs of sanctuary in London. London we consider to be this very diverse city, very inclusive, very welcoming, overall quite liberal, with a high population of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. However, so I wondered about that. So I do think there is something around that. There's lots of other local authorities and cities outside of London that have become boroughs of sanctuary. But it's just something to kind of ponder. So there is this will, there is this intention to become a borough of sanctuary. And what we've done so far, just kind of update you on how the process works, is we've we've kind of conducted what we call our listening phase. So we're trying to engage our communities on the ground. This is our kind of host communities. So Hackney, just to give you a bit of the demographics, 41% of our population were born outside of the UK. So 64% of the residents of Hackney are from what we call Black and global majority communities. So they're from Black African countries, Black Caribbean, we have an emerging Turkish community, and Jewish. So it's a really diverse country. There's a real understanding of different cultures, different stories, different people, and I think that is really reflected in the local authority that I work for. So a part of, as I mentioned, the process was to get people's voices, to have this listening phase. So we recruited some local ambassadors, and these are people experienced with the asylum process, still asylum seekers or sanctuary seekers in the borough. We trained them and we involved them in co-producing kind of focus groups with our stakeholders. So this is from health, from housing, from some of the voluntary and charity organisations, faith-based groups. And it was a very exciting thing because these kind of things don't happen very often in local authorities. So it's trying to bring everybody together to gain their views around what they think is happening and what needs to be done, all done better. And so when we looked at children and families, there were a number of things that came up in terms of the support. School was a big factor. A lot of families, as we've kind of mentioned already, not feeling welcome, not feeling understood. Some schools do some great work doing buddying systems where children and families who have been a bit more established, maybe from the same region or speak the same language, are buddied up with families who are newly arrived to kind of help them understand the school processes. There is also around health and access to health and understanding how to register with GPs and how to help. I mean, all GP surgeries should be providing interpreting services. Sometimes it doesn't always happen. Sometimes children are being used. So there is a lot of things that came out through kind of the listening. I think some of it we may put in our case study, so I won't go into much detail. And we're currently in the process of finalising our action plan. And I think it is really exciting because we are trying to hear what people are saying, and we're trying to build on some of the things that we already provide, which is, so we do have kind of a drop-in service. We work closely with our libraries and we're looking at free spaces, what's already available, and helping them to become more aware. So we're talking about kind of sensitizing. So we have these fantastic children's centres. We have about 21 children's centres and hubs that are aimed at families with children up to the age of 5 and beyond. And they're universal, they're free, they work with all, parents in the community. There's parenting workshops. Some of them actually work in different languages, depending on the communities in those areas. They offer different programs. They offer kind of immigration advice where that's needed. But we felt that there's more that needs to be done utilising those and helping families access those hubs. Because if you're newly arrived, you don't necessarily know. And one of the big bits of work that Welcome Hackney, this new team, has been working on is we have asylum seeking hotels in our borough. So these are the places that when you first arrive in the UK via the boats or any other means, you report to be an asylum seeker, you will be accommodated in a hotel. There's been a lot of work with the hotels around creating like community kitchens, because there's a lot of complaints about food. Food is a huge part of a lot of cultures. The process of cooking for your family, the process of buying ingredients and sharing and speaking, and the food is being provided by the hotels. So part of the project was to create these kitchens where families could come, cook for their families, for the other people in the hotel if they wish to, try and build a bit of community. We also commissioned a voluntary organisation because we understood the need to be also neutral because we are still the state. So we commissioned a voluntary organisation called Migrants Organise, who do a lot of advocacy and work with migrants, refugees and asylum seekers. And so they go in and also advocate for the families in those spaces, help signpost, help understand some of the systems. It's still, we also feel like sometimes it's just not enough, but it's definitely more than what some other local authorities might be doing. And I'm going off piece with all the different things that happen. But so it is, we are aware that there's more that we need to do, but there is a will. And I think that is so important in local authorities because it isn't always on the top agenda. And I think it's exciting that we have a team that came out of nowhere almost, and at the same time, this kind of push to become a borough of sanctuary. And all being well, we submit our application in January of 2026. So hopefully we'll be accepted. But there's been a lot of work to get us to where we are now. And at least now we know what we don't know. So we know a bit more about what some of the gaps are in the local authority, and how we need to better serve our children and families, moving on to the borough and supporting those that are already there. I'll maybe leave it at that, but
well, I'm good. My head's going so many different places, and I know that you all come from a real range of disciplines. So I'm going to throw a few things out in the hope that some of them speak to some of you. And I think this word "will" is really key, because actually, when there's a will, there's a way. And there's so many examples through history and recently, in refugee and kind of displacement history, we saw, for example, in response to the Ukraine war, there was this will for countries to collaborate, and within 72 hours borders were open, and like a great negotiations were arranged for how people could cross borders and access education and healthcare and all sorts. And here there was like resettlement schemes, but then we didn't see the same for people coming from other communities fleeing other wars, and that's got nothing to do with any reflection on people fleeing Ukraine. But the point is that when the will is there, there's lots that can happen. And there's lots that does happen. When the will isn't there, it doesn't. So I think, in terms of public infrastructure and like layers of care and healing, there's so many different layers. So, if you are somebody who is running something in schools or education or health, whether that's small or, national or whatever it may be, there is enormous things that you can do within that place or within that system, from, really cultivating that environment that feels healing centered in that particular community center to, partnering with an organization like AMNO or whoever to really work with you to think about how you can really support your institution, your policies, your practices, train your teams, like build your workforce so that ripples through the work that you're doing. And then if you're a policy person, for whom you're having to work with budgets and thinking about the economic value, there is so much evidence and research now about how investment in the youngest of children reach the greatest societal reward. Or, Germany, for example, if I'm quoting correctly, I think within 4 years, they had their Syrian resettlement scheme, which was also driven a lot by them meeting their kind of aging population in their country. But through the integration programs they put in place of supporting people with language and apprenticeships and to get into jobs, the research showed that within 4 years, those communities were paying more into the economy than had been spent on them. So there's lots of different economic arguments if one needs them. And then the human argument is workforces feel so much more sense of meaning and reward when you get to work in a local authority that's like really dedicated to sanctuary and care. It's so depressing for so many people working in municipal or public services because you care, or you want to leave work feeling good. You don't want to leave work feeling deeply depressed and about how poor, the services or the systems that could be doing things to care. And so I think across different levels, whatever your capacity, whatever your ripples of power and authority, there is something that can be done because every interaction matters, and every experience, with however big or small your services can really make a lasting impact for the lives of somebody. And we think a lot about systems work, but I think over and over about friends, loved ones, colleagues, and people I meet who have had displacement and refugee experiences, and the stories that they share were of that person who, you know, when we moved to this city, like a neighbor came and knocked on the door and she bought a nail varnish for like me, and I held that nail varnish with me, or that teacher or that librarian, or going to the service and somebody just seeing you and treating you like a human and trying to help you, even if you didn't get what you needed. Those experiences deeply, deeply matter. So really thinking in a healing centered way and committing to it. You don't need to be a mental health professional. You don't need to be psychologically trained. You can, you know, go to trainings and have some reflective practice support, and very, very quickly you can have some tools or practices that really help you, that feel really meaningful to you and make a huge difference to your practice and your care.
I think something that is in our title and we haven't spoken enough perhaps is that, of course, when addressing any population, we need to bring some intersectional lens. In a way, always trying to understand the different systems of oppression and privilege that one can have. But I wonder, what is special about children in your work? How that intersection between displacement and children that are in the condition of displacement, how do you handle that, both in terms of well-being, in services, and how do you even engage with them from a more psychological point of view?
I think it's probably best to start at that end. Give me more time because it's not quite what I work on. So.
I mean, if I can, I'll talk to this. So my main focus in my role is to work with separated refugee children. So these are children who've arrived in the UK without any parents. And as the state, we have a statutory duty to provide care. And care, as we talked about, is lots of definitions of care, but in terms of the holistic needs of that child. So we provide the housing, we provide support with immigration advice, we provide education, we provide recreational activity. But actually what really is important is that, and I think we've actually said, is that understanding, is that curiosity, is that awareness that these are children. And sometimes in my team, we do get young people who feel like, actually, you're not treating me the same as you would a British child. And sometimes I take that with, yeah, we need to listen to that, what is happening. So within the children's services I work with, we work based on what's called STAR principles. So it's working in a systemic, trauma-informed and anti-racist. So a lot of the work we do as social workers is a lot of our value based around social justice and listening and active listening and taking on feedback when children tell you things. So a lot of the children we work with, sometimes some of the carers, we work with a lot of foster carers who provide support to our children. So we'll sometimes say, they're so compliant, they really listen. And as somebody who's worked in this area for a long time, it angers me and it worries me. I think, what child is compliant most of the time? If you're allowing a child to be a child, that child is going to tell you what they don't like and what they do like. Once they feel safe, and we're talking a lot about like helping them heal. So it is interesting when we look at children when they say they don't feel they're being treated the same as other children. And sometimes this is because we haven't helped them understand the systems. Sometimes systems are different to what they think a system is going to be because they've not experienced it before and somebody else has told them, actually, you should expect to get this, this, and this. And that's really hard, especially for the children we work with who've had very long journeys. They have had to go through horrendous things in order to arrive in the UK. And they finally feel, maybe now I can be safe. And then things don't turn out the way that they're expecting to. It's going to be very frustrating for a lot of the children we work with to understand these very complex systems that even our British-born children, I've worked with children who are also British-born in the care system. And there's so many similarities in terms of the frustrations. And there's a lot around the sense of belonging and identity and who am I and how do I fit in. And I think the positive side of that is actually sometimes it works so much better when we have these host communities, when we have children, other children who've been here a lot longer, from Sudan, from Syria, from Vietnam, and they are so welcoming to our children. And it helps them feel connected to their home countries, because I think that's one of the things we really want to celebrate, the traditions, the values, the faiths of all the children that we work with. And sometimes we just want to help them make friends, feel less lonely. And these are children. And sometimes we forget that because we're so caught up in the policies, in the in kind of how are we going to provide certain services, and we forget that actually children want to be children. They want to have fun, they want to make friends, and they want to feel safe. And so that's one of the big things that we do in my team, is we try and encourage children to be children first, and everything else comes later. So that is, that's my perspective.
Yeah, so beautiful, and so many words that you're using that is kind of at the heart of Amna's work as well. Just to build on that, so you know, we have a program called Baitna, which means our home in Arabic, and that works with young children and their caregivers. And this is again all centered around like safe space and working with young children, recognizing that often there isn't somewhere else to go, or it's free school support. So, and when you've experienced, as you're describing, different experiences of journeys and displacement and fragmentation, you know, that there is support needed to help you to be a child, to kind of help that healing, and also very importantly is the role of caregivers, which the Van Leer Foundation really is dedicated to, because caregivers play such an important role in the life of children, and if their well-being is not nurtured and supported, then they potentially might struggle to really nurture their children, and not because the will isn't there, but because if you've gone through these horrendous experiences, you know, either you can become so attached because of the fear of separation, because of the experiences you've gone through together, or because of all of the overwhelm of things that you're carrying, you know, that attunement that sometimes children need in those developmental years that can have very long lasting impacts on children's experiences and outcomes. You know, there can be a misattunement. And so it's so important to do that work together. And then it's also really important to think about different gendered experiences as well, which I don't know if we've got time for today, but for those of you, you know, working with different genders and caregivers, it's really important to think about how displacement impacts, you know, the roles that people are used to playing, and like how emasculated you can often end up feeling as a, you know, male, often if you are unable to go out and get work because the systems prevent you from doing that, but yet, you know, your partner at home is like expecting you to do that, and all the dynamics that can come with that. But the way that we work with young children is really to create we've got these kind of practices that all are about like safety, predictability. So there's these session structures that our partners adapt in different ways, but so that children know what to expect when they come. So if you've dealt with overwhelming, you know, change, you need to have predictability to regain safety. So how sessions start, how they end, you know, the rituals and the spaces are very, very important. And very quickly, when someone experiences that, healing can start to take place. And then a lot of the work that we do, because we work with communities, as I'm sure is the same in Hackney and in lots of the contexts that you're in, is that where communities speak very different languages from each other. So you also need to be able to communicate non-verbally. So we draw on cultural wisdoms that exist all over the world and from the beginning of humankind that there's now an evidence base for, but using things like rhythm and movement and storytelling and art as tools to build connection to self and to other, and to help the body to regain that safety, because from a trauma perspective, lots of different things can happen in our body. And if we help our body to soothe or to awaken, then we can come back into our more trauma, emotionally regulated state. So I'll stop there to give space. But
yes, no, it will be very quick. I mean, I was going to say something similar on sort of thinking about the lives of caregivers and being conscious of how much that can impact on your ability to parent. And so trying to highlight some of the everyday stresses that refugees experience that would compromise their ability to engage with their children, or even to be with their children, because sort of in the case of home care. And I mean, in the research we do, we didn't ask questions about trauma because we're not trained to ask those questions, and we wouldn't be able to refer people if they did disclose. So we were just looking at kind of the everyday stresses of life and how that impacts on ability to parent. But just one last thing to say that we also, this work is all about thinking about how we can have a world without refugee camps. I'm very conscious of the fact that refugee camps can serve a purpose when you cross the border with your family and you have nothing, and you might have young children who need, you know, medical attention and so on. But once you're in the camp, it's very hard to leave. and the future, the children who are in a camp aged 1 or 2 or 3, they may still be there 30 years later, and having a life that's been massively narrowed in terms of potential flourishing and potential achievements, because they're literally enclosed in a space often in the middle of nowhere. And so thinking about how you can make a life, how you make cities welcoming for refugees of all ages, so that there is a future that they can aspire to, and that they are, if they are one day able to go home, that they've led a full life in exile, that they can carry on when they return.
It's a great segue to actually open up for questions. I think we have delighted ourselves with these speakers. So let's give them a round of applause. Meeting is correct. My timekeeping is not great, but I think your presentations were so rich and inspiring that I didn't want to cut them. But we have time to take a few questions here from the audience. Maybe we can take a couple of them and then we can.
I will ask very quickly so that we have time. Thank you very much for the presentation. In the case, Lucy, of your research, I was missing if you had anything on belonging and identity, because I didn't see anything related to that. And on Hackney, I would love to hear, how do you deal with the stigma and kind of rejection that migrants, refugees generate, not only in the population, but also in the people from the municipality. So that would be my 2 questions. Thank you.
More? You're shy or tired? Maybe we can.
Evening tea.
Yeah, maybe we can start with those and see if anyone else has other questions too. So I just have to because.
Thank you for the question. I wasn't very definitely, obviously. So belonging and identity. Yes. So we tried to when we were doing this research, we had the topic of social well-being, and there we were asking about connections locally. So whether people socialize with people of their own nationality, or if they socialize with people of other nationalities hanging around, including hers. I had quite a few questions around that. And we also asked this question: do you feel at home here? So we wanted to understand how much people felt that they were kind of now rooted in the city. But it's kind of in a survey, you just get a yes or no answer. So that's perhaps not the right question to ask in that kind of format. We certainly wanted to understand if people have felt they'd established enough of a network and enough of a kind of routine and felt accepted enough that this could be a home from home. So we haven't quite got the sort of survey questions right around that, but certainly it's something that I was really interested to understand. But also people have said to me, this isn't my home because I have my home in where I come from, and I want to go back there. So it's balancing making sure that people have a good life and they have everything they need, but understanding that they may not want to put down the roots because they don't want to sort of lose their identity where they come from. So those are kind of sensitive topics that are quite hard to unpick, and they're very different from one person to another.
Thank you. So in relation to stigma, I would say it's quite, I would think of it in terms of people coming to access services. So in the community, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between anybody living in Hackney because it's so diverse. But the term asylum seeker definitely holds a lot of stigma in the UK. There's still a lot of very unhappy people who have very, they don't really understand what it means, and they don't understand what it means to leave your country, to be displaced, to be forced to live somewhere else. So I think what we try to do, and what I've been trying to do specifically over the many years I worked in the borough, is we do a lot of awareness raising events. So we do them within the council, first of all, because we're very aware that people working in the council hold a lot of power. So with housing, for example, they deal with a lot of people. When they get their immigration status, for example, and they are then able to go into more permanent temporary accommodation that is run by the housing department, sometimes we have heard stories of people feeling quite discriminated against, maybe they haven't used interpreters. There's just a lack of understanding and knowledge about the immigration system, about the very short time frame in which you've been granted status. You have 28 days to then vacate the accommodation provided to you by the Home Office, so the Immigration Department. And so there is a lot of tension. There's a lot of tension, I think, in general in the UK. I think in Hackney, we're very aware of that tension. So like I mean, we put on a lot of events. We put on a lot of different spaces to have people air their issues. So we kind of have these brave spaces. We have these inclusive conversation clubs. They're quite interesting. So we have them like every month, and people from around the council will come, and we have a fantastic facilitator who manages to really make people feel that they can say what they want to say. And people do, and they're very respectful. And it's good because people need to say, I'm feeling, I get it, but I'm feeling a bit frustrated about the resources being used for these communities that are new to the UK. Like, I appreciate it's hard for them, but like, we're struggling. We've got all these, and people have to say what they have to say. And it's helping people understand that sometimes this isn't the choice of the individual. These are systems beyond the control of these individuals that arrive. But so creating spaces has been really important in helping people understand, helping people gain empathy and understand the complexities of people's lives. So that then hopefully trickles down into those interactions we were talking about, being welcoming, showing some level of, just understanding. We put on like events for the community. There's a few years ago, I did a panel with some young people, and we welcomed people, residents of Hackney, to come and hear about the stories of the journeys of the young people that we work with. And it was a very scary thing for them to do. We had to prepare for all eventualities. Like, are people going to be quite abusive? Are people going to be saying quite challenging things to these? These are teenagers, all of them adults, so 18, 19. But it was incredible. Actually, people came because they were interested. People wanted to hear their stories. People were very welcoming. So I do find that Hackney is quite unique because we are used to having communities come from lots of different countries. There is an openness to asylum seekers and refugees that you don't necessarily see in other areas in the country. So I think stigma exists, and it will always exist because the language we use as well, and the media and the rhetoric around immigration is, we've got already, sometimes it just becomes a scapegoat for all the problems that country has. So it is very difficult. I think we have great comms team as well. And so the comms that goes out, we also have to be quite sensitive about the kind of where funding is going, because it does create this feeling of, you're putting all this money in this with refugees when you should be doing it. So we have to be mindful about what information we also put out in terms of some of the programs, to be sensitive to some of the communities that might feel that we're leaving them out. Because there's always going to be that feeling, especially when new communities come in, you feel like, well, they're new. I've been here this whole time and no one's helped me with my housing situation. So it's a delicate balance to play. I think we're doing some really good work. There's a lot more we can do. But yeah, these spaces to talk and reflect. It's also part of our agenda of being more anti-racist as a local authority. So we're having very, very delicate conversations and sensitive conversations about race and about how we feel as members of the council, people working for a local authority, and then how that reflects into our interactions with people in the community. And we're not there, but we are definitely aware that we need to be better. Thanks. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Is there any other burning question?
Yes, my concern is about you go about the research about refugee camp, for example. There are a lot of things that happen behind the scene that you may not be aware, and you'll find that most of the people you interact with or you talk to may not be able to actually expose or to tell you what happens behind the scene. What do you normally do? What are some of the mechanisms that you use so that you get the information behind the scene? Because as you set up the goals and strategy to assist, especially the small kids who are within the camp, so that they can get help as you come up with good policies and your advice of the legislations, you must, it's a must, it's good that you know some of those issues that actually happen just behind the scene, and they are not able to talk about them openly, like social behavior, health issues, and other things. Thank you.
Another one? Yes. And then we have to be very beautiful.
Okay, thank you for sharing a lot about the refugees children who touches the heart of many. Now, my concern is that we have shared a lot about what we do. But my concern is, maybe if I can ask, what role do children's voices play in shaping their own narrative in this refugee reporting? And maybe secondly, what are there any effects of labeling these children as refugees or vulnerable in relation to access to their education?
Great, those questions.
Very quickly.
I don't know. Okay, I'll have a quick go. So, I mean, you're asking a very challenging question. I think, as we're short on time, trust building is deeply important, and obviously, you have to think about who you know, talking about power, who you are, what your role is. Over time, people start to share things, especially if you spend time somewhere getting immersed in a community, or people tell people something, and so the sources of information come through. But what it made me think about is actually a colleague who spent a lot of time working in South Sudan, where, as in many places of the world, there's like lots of very difficult things happening, and actually often strategies that really work can be sometimes when you know that there are services or systems or offices that are problem and there is harm coming from them, that often can be a good place to start. Because actually, if they are in a position of power or authority, and you can build ambassadors and like champions from within that, and you can work out like what serves their agenda, and through that start to do some work with them in collaboration, which is driven by what the community needs are, but you know that that's a really important team or person or power holder. It can be it can be a route in. So sometimes military services or justice services, like they can be the place to start. It's a risky strategy, but there's certain contexts in which that's really important to start changing abuse dynamics, for example, that exist within a community. And to your question, I think there are lots of, it's really, it's harder to obviously like understand from the perspective of a child, but there are a number of increasing initiatives within the research field where people are really trying to make sure that they're finding ways to hear and understand through the perspective of a child about their experience and what their wishes and their needs are. Obviously, advocacy-wise is, a huge way to go, but we're seeing a lot more making sure that people from that age group or that community with lived experience are the ones advocating. But with young children, there are tools now, like research tools, like using, photos or drawings or ways in which, like, you can ask somebody about their experience or to share something through an image, for example. So like there's lots of move away from like surveys or things that might be harder to do with young children to by like working in a language through the eyes of a child or through the experience of a child about like what matters to them. I don't know if that answers your question, but like photo voice is an example of a kind of method that does that.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I think we are a bit over. But I think it has been very interesting to see and to kind of go in depth and in terms of what are the challenges that both researchers, practitioners, local authorities need to engage with, and how insufficient our traditional way of doing things is. Because what we're hearing is maybe we need to learn more about the storytelling, about engaging with feeling and emotions. We're thinking about cities, and that is part of the methodology that engaging with. And then also how we need even to rethink what is the role of the state in care. And I think, there's a lot of work in the Latin American region that has been done in championing, understanding, how the role of the state needs to be and play out and how to redirect the functions. And I think that is one of the challenges in terms of governance, how to center care, life, and healing in a moment in history where everything is kind of broken. And if we don't put that at the center of what we need to do, then there will not be any future then. So thank you so much for all your wisdom, and thank you for inviting me.
Activity. I was like, wow. I was like, wow.